So I was asked to talk about the needs of the seafood industry and fishing industry operating, or may operate, up in the Arctic. And the first thing I want to say is that all the points that these gentlemen and the previous panel made about different kinds of needs all apply to what the seafood industry would need to operate in a safe and efficient and effective manner up in the high Arctic. I was particularly interested in the Teflon coating because having some experience with a baseball bat and climbing in the rigging and knocking ice out, that might actually be something some of us would really appreciate if it ever gets developed. So what I want to touch on, though, really is first what the seafood industry does not need in the Arctic. And in order to do that, I need to tell a little story. Grant Ulmer mentioned the Arctic Fishery Management Plan, the North Pacific Fishery Management Council adopted back in 2008 or 2009. That fishery management plan prohibits commercial fisheries in the U.S. EEZ north of Bering Strait for any species. Does not affect subsistence fisheries, does not affect small-scale, more local fisheries inside state waters within 3 nautical miles, and there are a few of those, not very large. That FMP did not come about by accident, and it did not come about by government. That FMP actually was generated by the seafood industry. I was representing a large organization of the Alaska seafood industry at that time. And what had happened is, over the course of the previous decade or so, a number of the fishing companies that operate in Alaska noticed that there was more access north of Bering Strait, mostly in the southern part of the Chukchi Sea. And these guys are all competitors. You have to think like some of these folks that are involved in the fishing industry. They're very entrepreneurial. Some people might even say a little piratical. And you know, you get them all in a room and they start talking. And it's all, you know, sweetness and light. Except you notice the guys are going like this, and this other person sitting over here going, "I know I can do better than you." And they're a little sneaky, you know, sometimes, and they won't tell each other exactly what they know. And some folks had gone up north and putzed around and come back and said, you know, there isn't anything up here. And probably there wasn't. But none of those other guys would believe them, right? It's like, oh, yeah, wow. So what the point of this is, what happened was in 2000, and I think it was about 2005, early 2006, industry leaders got together quietly and had a discussion and decided that they'd try and save themselves from themselves, and came up with a notion that north of Bering Strait, it would be useful to just have a stand down. And there was a couple of reasons for that. One is the industry did not want to have a land rush, sea grab, you know, race for fish. That would be chaotic. That would be economically stupid, probably biologically irrational, and politically a disaster. If a bunch of big fishing vessels started showing up off the coast of northwest Alaska around Barrow, the reaction of people that actually live up there would have been quick, swift, and not very pleasant. The industry folks, to their credit, sort of realized that. So we actually partnered with some of the ENGO crowd, took a proposal to the North Pacific Fishery Management Council, and it passed, and the United States government adopted that. And it went into effect in 2009, as I recall. Simultaneously with that, a number of us that were involved in the industry had also been involved in fishing issues in the Bering Sea. And as I think most all of you know, Bering Sea is extremely productive, the largest fisheries in the world. You know, roughly half the production of the United States comes out of the Bering Sea Gulf of Alaska. And in the mid-1980s, as the expansion of 200-mile zone policies drove foreign fleets out of various economic zones around the world. Certain fleets moved into the international waters in the center of the Bering Sea, and it's commonly referred to as the Bering Sea donut hole, and proceeded to fish like crazy. They were hauling 1 million tons or so out of there for a very short period of time per year. And we got involved in negotiations with them. Interestingly enough, around the time on Fran's, where she showed the little graphic of approvals for research in Russia, and the time when we had the big spike in approvals and it all dropped off. That was the time when these negotiations were going on. There wasn't a lot of there's not a lot of correlation there, other than the goodwill that was going on at the time of glasnost between the United States and the Soviet Union, and we actually partnered, developed a joint proposal for a convention to close the Bering Sea donut hole. It was a joint Soviet-U.S. proposal, and eventually it went into place, but not before. Those stocks were completely fished out, still have not recovered. It's one of the largest stock collapses probably in the world. Didn't get a lot of attention, in the media, but it was a very dramatic event. That experience also told us that if we're going to close our waters at 200 nautical miles, then we ought to be looking at something beyond 200 nautical miles. The last thing you want is to close off your own waters, and as the Arctic became more accessible, have fleets from China or India or Singapore or Japan or wherever come up there at mile 201 and just undermine your conservation objectives. So we also work with folks over here building just down the road, and Congress passed a resolution sort of directing the United States to negotiate a convention for the international waters to mirror what the North Sea Council did. Basically, don't initiate commercial fishing until you have the science and a management structure in place. The reason I wanted to bring that up is in terms of thinking about management for fisheries and what the industry needs. The industry doesn't want to have that land rush in our own waters, and we don't want to have a repeat in international waters. We're trying to get there, and we're making progress in the international waters. All of that begs the question, though, how do we get the science, and what science do we need in order to actually manage for what may be some fisheries in the future that are sustainable? The area that I'm focusing on, it does not include the Bering Sea. It does not include the Barents Sea or the peripheral seas around the Arctic Ocean. The area I'm going to talk about now really is that area north of Bering Strait, north of the US, north of Canada, north of Russia, that sort of central Arctic Ocean, both domestic and international waters. There are robust fisheries in the Barents Sea. There's robust fisheries in the Bering Sea. Science programs are really quite developed and meet our needs. But listening to all the presentations, the kind of science that the industry needs to have is really the kind of science that focuses on understanding what species are there, understanding how they fit into an ecosystem, understanding their life history characteristics so you can determine if there are commercial species there, what level you can harvest them at a sustainable level, what the effect of various levels might, harvest might have on other really important components of that marine ecosystem, marine mammals, seabirds, that are important to folks that live up there. And how do you do all that? How would you conduct a fishery if you ever did that, so that you do it in a way that is environmentally responsible and also economically efficient? So there's been quite a debate about whether or not there are commercial or stocks of fish or shellfish north of Bering Strait or up in that area I just described that would be economically viable, and should there be any fisheries on those, and quite a debate in the scientific community. And at first there was a lot of discussion about stocks moving north, and this is going to be really quite important, and we've got to get ahead of that curve and figure this all out. And that, scientific community was sort of making those cases. and got picked up by the common press. And then other research came along and sort of said, well, wait a minute, there's this other thing that goes on, and especially over in the Pacific sector, this cold pool is the term, and it's just the oceanographic conditions and stratification of water masses, and it may block the northern movement of certain commercial species like pollock and cod, but there may be others that might move in there. And with that debate between the scientists, the fishing industry is sitting there going, well, if they don't know, maybe we can figure out, maybe we'll just go back up there and start thinking about what we might go look for. And because we have the Arctic FMP, that means that the fishing industry folks that want to go into the Arctic or thinking about going into the Arctic can't really do it quite yet. They are talking about it quietly amongst themselves. They are thinking about what they might go look at. So the necessity for getting the kind of scientific information that I'm talking about becomes quietly more urgent. It's not in the press. You don't see a lot of debate about that publicly, but it's definitely out there. And what we've been trying to do, some of this quietly, again, through the commission and other venues, is look at where we can develop synergies with folks that are already going up in that part of the world to start collecting information that will tell you whether or not you want to have a fishery, for what species, and at what level. It's a long ways off, but one of the key components of that is understanding what's going on in the Chukchi Sea, for example. I'll use that as an example. And we can't do that just as the United States. We've got to have information on both sides of the maritime boundary with Russia. There's programs that are doing some very good work there. They are not designed to answer some of these questions yet. So we've been working quietly to try and get our Russian colleagues interested in joint research to look at some of the broader ecosystem questions and broader fisheries questions. And I'm sort of pleased to see Jackie Krebmeier's slide that had all the flags across the bottom, because that international component for research is the only way we're going to actually get what we need. We have to have the cooperation of our Russian neighbors. And unfortunately, in some ways, it's not bad. But so in terms of a need, in terms of what, from an industry perspective, we would like to see happen, would be an expansion of efforts to cooperate both with our Russian neighbors, our Canadian neighbors, and then more broadly on the international collective, either through the Arctic Council or some other venue. It's the only way we can do it. China, Japan, and Korea are all engaged in research in that part of the world. They all have assets. I was recently in Shanghai. They're very interested in trying to understand how to partner with the United States and others to do additional research, and what kinds of research would we be interested in, and all those kinds of questions. So it's sort of a laundry list of very sort of 30,000 foot level look, but it really comes down to, in my view, having recognizing the limitations of what we can do here, is reaching out to folks in other parts of the world that have the resources that can help us get what we need, and then having a good, strong voice to educate our folks up in the Hill about the need that the United States has in the Arctic, and recognizing the not shortcomings, I probably shouldn't say that, recognizing the fact that we are not going to be able to get all that we want. That's it, really. I think I'm just going to stop right there. And thank you very much.